Right, a support group from Milton Keynes which supports grandparents who are denied access to their grandchildren. Is taking part in a national campaign that's actually being taken to Westminster next month. Grandparts support the campaign, which believes that broken bonds between grandchildren and their grandparents is a form, well, they use the term, of child abuse. It's estimated in the UK that more than 1 million grandchildren are denied contact with their grandparents. Marion Turner is the founder of Grandpart. Nice to actually have you properly in the studio. Last time I chatted to you, you were in your kitchen, weren't you? And clearly,
sewing room.
Clearly, in the 2 years since we spoke, your situation has evolved a lot, and indeed, the notion around grandparental alienation has evolved a lot as well. For anybody who didn't hear you, and it's a couple of years ago now, let's just touch on what your situation was, because it is now resolved, but it was heartbreaking at the time. So this was your son and his now ex-wife and grandchildren. What was your relationship like with the grandchildren before the issues arose?
Well, I only have one grandchild, and before it all blew up, the situation wasn't really that good because wasn't allowed to form a bond. This was the problem. So for the first year of my grandson's life, it was a bit of a struggle. So
when you say not allowed, I'm reading between the lines here, but are you talking about perhaps possibly a difficult mum who was blocking the route there?
Yes, yeah, that's virtually it. Yeah. So it was my decision after a year that, because I hadn't done anything, so it was my decision to walk away because that was how I could cope with it. So that's how Grandpart was formed, really, because I kept trying to talk to people about it. Of course, it's very difficult when you're talking to friends and family, especially if it's your friends that have actually got a good relationship with their grandchildren, then they don't sort of fully understand. So I was looking for somebody to talk to and get some support.
It's a big step, to use your phrase, to walk away.
Yes, it is.
You may have heard me 10 minutes ago saying, you live your life, you do your work, you head towards retirement, you are as good a parent as you can be, although we all know we mess it up, but that's another conversation for another day. And the grandchildren are a little bit the cherry on the cake, aren't they? They're a little bit the thing that drives you through that third age. So to walk away from it was a big thing.
It was, but it was my survival, really, because if I had done something that I could justify being sort of treated with the hostility that I'd got, then I could have probably understood it. But because there was no reason for the way I was being treated and my family, because it obviously extends to the whole family. It's not just you that miss out. It's sort of their cousins and aunts and uncles. I just thought it was probably a desperate measure. I thought if I walked away, it would solve two problems. One for me, that the heartache would go away, which it doesn't ever. And also they might think, oh, she's serious, I'm going to have to do something about it. But that didn't work either.
I think that there's a really, really important point here which goes beyond grandparents, and you've just made it, but I'm going to flesh it out a little bit. And that is when a marriage breaks up, and I've been through a marriage breakup personally myself, if you're not careful, there is collateral damage that goes beyond the children and the two people involved, because the children will have been used, in most cases, to a family unit, seeing the cousins, seeing the uncles, the aunts. Yeah. Obviously depends on the dynamics of family, but mostly they will have been involved with the wider family. And I've personally seen situations where not only grandparents, but cousins, but uncles, but aunts have found themselves out of the loop. And I will say, in my own situation, it was something that both myself and my ex consciously made sure that our children didn't lose those family bonds with the grandparents, with the cousins, with the aunts and the uncles. In fact, if anything, we encouraged them even more because we felt that they would need them more than ever because of the breakup of our marriage. But it is a real issue, isn't it, where as one nuclear couple breaks up, the ripple effect through the family is massive.
Yes, I know when my first marriage broke up, I would never have dreamt of saying to my now ex-husband, oh, you can't take your children to see their grandma or granddad. It wouldn't even have occurred to me, but that's what people do, unfortunately.
I wonder, in your experience running the charity, what the reasons behind these alienations are, because it's fair to say that none are ever going to be identical. What have you seen in terms of the grounds on which this happens?
Most of it is down to either the daughter-in-laws, where they've not really got that bond with the ex-mother-in-law, so they hold all the strings. So because they've got a bond with their own mum, then I suppose the mother-in-law, ex-mother-in-law, is obsolete. Or
perhaps just a really big threat.
Yes. And on most of occasions, it almost seems like a jealousy thing about the bond
by threat,
the son has with their own mother. And sometimes, in most instances, they haven't actually done anything, and that does make it harder. If you've had this big blow up of an argument for something that you might not have planned to do, but you've upset your daughter-in-law or you've upset your son, then you can understand it. But a lot of them haven't. In other cases, they're a little bit more serious, where they have to actually go down and seek legal advice. So they may want to go down the court route.
And it can go both ways, let's be honest. Mums can be really annoying with a new child.
Yeah.
They can be overbearing, they can be over-present. But we're talking about something different here. We're talking about where people have not instigated the chasm, where they've not instigated the break, and they're finding themselves excluded.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and it's heartbreaking. They call it a living bereavement because you're grieving somebody that is still alive. So it's really hard. It's tough. It's heartbreaking.
The other problem you have is that divorces are so complex. When you're in the throes of it and you're dealing with lawyers and all sorts of stuff and houses, and in a way, the parents don't have the time to look at the bigger picture. So as the grandparent, when there is that breakdown happening, and you must see this in the people that you support with your charity, they just don't. They can't get through that wall of grief that's happening currently in the family that's breaking up.
Yes, that's true, yes. And, we've got a few members that their own daughters have died and they're going through grief. And it's the actual ex-son-in-law that's controlling. And, they have to sort of make appointments to see their grandchildren. That's really bad because you've got double grief there.
It all comes back to the same thing that so many people forget in divorce. And I know I'm going to sound like I'm pontificating here, but think of the children first. Put the children first, because if you do that, everything... I'm not saying it makes it easier, because divorce is the last thing in the world I'd recommend to anyone. But if you think of the children first, everyone can win, including the grandparents and the uncles and the cousins. I'd love to hear your experiences if you found yourself excluded for whatever reason, one way or another, from your grandchildren. Do get in touch at 08081 00 8800 is the phone number. You can also text 81333 with your text starting 3CR. Jules says, Nick, it's heartbreaking not being allowed to see your grandchildren. Luckily, the older ones can choose for themselves. I've gone months without seeing the younger ones, but when I'm allowed to, they know that I love them, even when we've not been able to see each other. I just say I've been ill, and they're too young to know the real reasons. Heartbreaking, as you say, Jules. So do share your experiences. 08081 00 8800 is the phone number. Have you been excluded or cut off from access from your grandchildren? 81333 for the text as well. After news headlines, we'll find out exactly what this new campaign is all about, what it's going to be taking to Westminster, and how you can get involved with the work of Grandpa as well. It's Nick Coffer on BBC Three Counties Radio. It's crazy. This is BBC Three Counties. I'm all fingers and thumbs today. Did you notice that? BBC Three Counties Radio. I'm Nick Coffer with you through till 3 o'clock this afternoon. Myself and Marion Turner, we were just engrossed in a really serious discussion and forgot we had to go on the radio. Should we go on the radio now?
That's a good idea.
Marion is the founder and general all-round boss of Grandpart, which is a charity she founded in Milton Keynes, which aims to help grandparents who find themselves isolated from their grandchildren. And as we learned just before the news, that's not just a case of a family divorcing or parents splitting up. You told me of some incidences where one of the parents had died. And of course, when you think about that, of course, that could then cause problems because the other parent may move away. The other parent may, for example, find it too hard to see the parents of the partner who's gone. Imagine if it was someone who was so utterly in love with his or her partner, seeing the mum or the dad may be too painful and they just go off the rails and block access. There are a number of reasons that grand parental access can be blocked. And I say this loosely, but on occasion it could be, in large inverted commas, understandable or at least explainable. But your role is to make sure that contact remains healthy and constant, and that's really, really important. Not understandable, explainable, I think was the better word for that. Ray is in Milton Keynes. Ray, you've got some experience of this, haven't you?
Yes, indeed, Nick. My son and his partner split up very acrimoniously, very little time for each other, and we became a victim of that. So the mother was able to not give access to my son, and subsequently we were regular babysitters, we were regular carers for the boy, we had him stay over with us for weekends, and all of that was taken away from us. And while the court case was going on for my son to get access, we were allowed no access whatsoever, and that went on for just over a year.
It's quite hard sometimes as a radio presenter to not start seething, because I have to stay very balanced, but I'm also a dad and I've got parents. And as you hear this, Marion, you must be thinking, oh.
Yeah, it's just all too familiar, these scenarios that happen. Unfortunately, when people do get divorced, that's what happens. But going down the court route is another way that grandparents can do it, because we don't have, as grandparents, we don't have any automatic rights at all. So you can't even use it, to say, well, I have rights. What will happen is when you go and see a solicitor, if you wanted to go down that route, the first thing they will tell you is that you have to agree to do mediation. Now, mediation will only work if all parties turn up. And
it's voluntary.
Yes. And invariably, the person that's causing all the problems is the one that won't turn up. So then you have to consider whether you do actually want to go down the court route, which is very lengthy, very costly, and you might well come out of it with exactly the same situation that you're in at the moment, where you can only have a certain amount of access to your grandchild or grandchildren.
Ray, you mentioned there that you used to do the overnights and the babysitting. What was your relationship as grandparents with the little boy?
It's excellent, and we still see him now, but we're restricted to seeing him for 3 hours on the first Sunday of every month, and we have to do that in a public place.
Why?
That's the only terms and conditions that she will put in place. So we're not allowed to have him at our home. We're not allowed to have her. She has to be in the same room. So if we go to an activity centre, for example, she and her new partner will sit on one table, and then our grandson and us can sit on another table, and then we do the various different activities together.
Ray, you'll forgive me for asking this, and I have to tread carefully as well, but
Sure.
When access is restricted or when parents only see their children, for example, at contact centres, it's because fundamentally there's been a safeguarding issue or concern for the well-being and safeguarding of the children. Am I right in guessing that that's not the case here?
It's not the case with us. My son was... it's a long story about my son and the mother, which is just a little bit too emotional to go into. But ultimately, my son has controlled access to his son on certain occasions. But we're not allowed to have him at our house, despite my son not living now. We're not allowed to see him unless the mother is present. Now, the court have invited us to make formal application for access, and obviously that's a process we've got to go through. But it's very restrictive.
Yeah.
It's very, very expensive to go through, and to be honest, it's not a problem. I'll spend the money necessary. It's expensive for the mum, and it's expensive for us. And do you know what? That money's just better spent on the child.
On him, yeah, of course. Which is a story of most divorces, in fairness, whether that's the grandparents or the parents. I mean, you can you can understand the logic that if there are, and I use the word loosely, issues around one of the parents, that the other parent may be concerned that parent will turn up outside of his or her allocated. You can see that. But isn't it sad, Marion, that there's not a way of just finding a simple way forward, because that relationship for the grandchildren with their grandparents is so important, especially, Ray, of course, at a time where for your grandson it will have been an unstable period because of what was going on with his parents.
No, absolutely. And additionally, there's another child involved, because my son has two children, and so with two different mums, and subsequently the two boys. One parent is happy for the two boys to meet. The same parent we're talking about at the moment is not happy to meet the other child. So there are two siblings, albeit half siblings, that can never have access to talk to each other, because the mother, again, is saying, no, that's not happening.
And I reiterate, I think, what I said earlier on as well. And I don't know every individual situation, but the more I know people who have been through divorces and breakups where children are involved, I do wish people would just think of the children, because if you put the children first, then actually, in my experience, everything else kind of falls into place, Marion. Is that what you see? That if you're looking at what they need, then the adults in the mix who chose to be in the situation can find a way forward.
Absolutely. I don't think they realise what damage they do to the children, especially if you've had that bond with them where, like you say, you've looked after them. It's unfair because the children don't have any rights either, and they say that they can speak, but unfortunately sometimes due to their age, like when my situation happened and my grandson was only a year old, he didn't have a voice. If you've got grandchildren that are older, say 14, 15 or even 9 years old, they've had that bond and they can actually say to their parents, look, I need to see grandma and granddad.
Ray, you mentioned that the story was too painful to recount, the particular story with your son, but I would be interested just to finally know how this affects you as a grandparent, if you can sort of extract yourself from the situation with your son, which clearly is fairly involved in isolation, but for you as a granddad to not have that regular access with your grandson, to only have those 3 hours of, I mean, let's be honest, the last thing you want is his mum there watching over you in a public. I mean, I don't know her, but you know, you want your own private time. It's what grandparents do. How does that leave you?
Oh, absolutely. It rips us apart. And when we leave him, when we go away, and he comes up to us and he grabs my wife and just says, I want to stay over. I want to come and have a sleep over, Nanny. Sorry,
could I just ask how old they are?
My grandchild will be 5 next week.
Okay.
So we see him on the first Sunday, so we see him on the 1st of September, and his birthday is on the 5th of September.
Okay.
And as grandparents, you must just be bursting for that first Sunday of the month.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
That's coming up this Sunday, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thing is, Ray, as we hear you tell your story, we can hear, obviously, palpably, how impossibly emotionally difficult this is for you.
I have to say it is, and sometimes it's just hard to hold it together.
Yeah. Is this the kind of person that should be coming to Grandpa, Marion?
Definitely. Yeah. I can't solve everybody's problems, but what we do as a support group is just that. Everyone in the room is in a very, very similar situation, if not the same sometimes, as yourself. We have tears, but we're there to help. We've got a lot of outside support as well. We've got solicitors that support us, and obviously the MPs, but the solicitors are the main part that help us. And you can talk to people, and it doesn't matter if you get upset, because they're used to it. They get upset too. And the group's been going for 4 years now, and I've seen so many people come through the door, and it gives them a lot of strength as well, because they know they're not alone. Because when it does happen to you, whatever the situation is, you do actually think that it is just you, and it just makes you feel better and gives you strength to come along and just talk to others.
Ray, I'm a firm believer. Call me an old hippie if you want, but I'm a firm believer in the good coming through, and you're clearly a lovely granddad, as quite clearly Nanny is as well, and you are and always will be his grandparents. And even if right now it is difficult to get that access, you will still be those grandparents. And I am a firm believer that eventually a way will be found, because your love for your grandson and indeed his love for you will make sure that a way will be found. And I appreciate if that's a bit of a hippie view of the world, but I'm certain that at some point it has to change, doesn't it?
Well, you can always hope for karma, and we certainly do. But the sad thing is, I have an elderly mum myself who's 83 years of age. She's visually impaired and she's disabled, so she doesn't get to see. And we used to have the child stayed with us. We then go to her, so we get to see him, etc. And now we have to take her to a public venue. She's not. She hasn't got all of her facilities, to be able to get around. So we have to get her there. We have to find we've got the right space there, and that's the only time he gets to meet his great grandmother as well. And it is just so emotionally drawing.
I do really appreciate you sharing your story, Ray. And what we do know is that lots and lots of people find themselves in a similar situation, whether it is parents who are alienated from their own children, whether it's grandparents, uncles and cousins who are alienated from people who matter. This reminds me, we haven't had Jo Abrahams on the programme for 3 or 4 months. I need to get her back in, our lovely family lawyer. And I think this will be something we can touch on as well, because Jo is particularly hot on parental alienation and by definition grandparental alienation as well. So perhaps we'll keep your number in the bank if you're okay with that, Ray. And when I get Jo back on in the next month, we might be able to look at this for you on air as well. But above all, I really appreciate you sharing your story. And so many of us listening to this, our parents, our grandparents, and we completely identify with your pain.
Thank you.
You must see that a lot, Marion.
Yes, unfortunately. Yes, it's very sad.
In terms of anyone wanting to come along and join you, so where do they find you? So Grandpart is based in Milton Keynes. You'll see anyone sort of within a radius of anyone who can get to you, Milton Keynes, into Northamptonshire as well. When do you meet?
We meet monthly in Milton Keynes, and we're at Shenley Church End Parish Council meeting rooms. And in Northampton, we're at Harpole. But if you go onto my website, all the dates for both the meetings are on there.
So www.granpart, so GRANPART, granpart.co.uk. You can email Marion at marion.turner@granpart.co.uk, and the phone number there is 01604 830 070. So marion.turner@granpart.co.uk. and grandpart.co.uk for the website. You're all headed down to Westminster next Wednesday. Are they going to have any time to see you lot?
Well, hope so. The people that have arranged this have been doing this since beginning of the year, so who knows?
Good luck with that. It's been nice to have you in the studio, and good luck with the continuing growth of your charity as well. grandpart.co.uk if you want to find out more. You're listening to BBC Three Counties Radio.